We're going to continue our journey here of the 7 principles of working with pain as described by Jon Kabat-Zinn in this book, Mindfulness Meditation for Pain Relief. We looked at 3 of them on Tuesday. All right. And the first 3 was, as long as you are breathing, there is more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what is wrong. And essentially, it's really about coming back to your breath and using the breath, in essence, as an anchor to help you come into number 2 and 3 here, which is the power of mindfulness is in the present moment. The power of mindfulness is in the present moment. And essentially being in this moment, sort of connecting and being in this moment. And then number 3 is inhabiting the present moment. Inhabiting, or as Thich Nhat Hanh says, dwelling, right? Dwelling in it. That oftentimes we're not dwelling, we're dwelling in the what ifs, we're dwelling in the worry of the future, concern about things we've done in the past, whatever it might be, and we're not really in the present moment. And so by using our breath, connecting with the health in us through our breath, that innate health that's already present, we don't need to change anything. Here I am breathing, and therefore there is more health than disease. Here is the present moment, and I am choosing to dwell or inhabit that moment. All right, so those are the first 3 principles per Jon Kabat-Zinn of working with pain. All right, the 4th one that we're going to cover today, the 4th one is, when faced with situations we don't like, we usually default to 2 options. Our usual options when faced with situations that we do not like and that we would not wish anyone to suffer from are twofold. We can run away and do our best to either ignore them or escape from them. How many of us have done that? Right? When there's a situation you don't want, running away, escaping. Alternatively, we can get caught up in endlessly obsessing about our troubles. How many times have we endlessly obsessed about our troubles? Right. This is the classic wallowing. We should have a painting of the wallowing and somebody getting out of the wallowing. Either way, we feel victimized by our experience. Woo! As a consequence, we might find ourselves turning toward familiar sources to dull the pain, such as alcohol, drugs, food, endlessly getting lost in our phones, binge watching television, scrolling and posting on social media, going down one rabbit hole after another. Even if these coping strategies and perpetual distractions opportunities deliver anything but an enduring sense of satisfaction and contentment. While they may offer temporary relief to some degree, such pursuits also tend to foster increasing addiction, disconnect, and discontent. Without awareness, our devices can easily degrade our analog lives, eclipse many of our most important moments, and make our lives even more stressful and problematic in the long run. Data from 2021 show that on average, people check their phones over 250 times a day, or approximately 16 times in every waking hour. One sensible antidote to be mindful of the impulse to check your phone and perhaps turn that exercise into its own meditation practice, which can quickly lead to more frequent and wiser self-regulation and restraint on your part. What is more, when faced with stress and situations we don't like, we can easily fall into the habit of being irritable, gruff, and angry much of the time due to our pain and frustration. It might be totally understandable, but it's not necessarily helpful. Another trap when dealing with pain is the understandable tendency to withdraw emotionally, to become more distant, to cut ourselves off from others, and from life, and as a consequence, live in a state of perpetual contraction of body and mind. None of these maladaptive coping strategies and escape tactics bring us much happiness or well-being. Grinning and bearing it isn't that useful in the long run either. At some point, hopefully, we can come to see that blaming all our difficulties on our pain condition, no matter how justified, doesn't improve our circumstance. In fact, it often compounds our frustration and can even lead to despair. So that's recognizing what many people do in pain, in the face of pain. Okay. And this is fairly prevalent in our society, which is it just is sort of distraction, checking our phones, drinking alcohol, overeating. Binge eating is actually the interesting part about eating. I'm not sure if I've covered that here, but one of the things about when we are in pain is we feel stressed and we feel worried and we're scared and we feel like we're in danger. And so that's the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response. And when we're in pain and we feel like we're in danger and we're scared and it's triggering our stress response, we want to try to find ways to decrease that stress and in turn decrease the pain. But we don't have techniques or tools to decrease their stress as a population that are healthy, and so we turn to things like alcohol and overeating, and the theory on overeating is, if you don't have a good mindfulness practice, or if you don't have a good breathing practice, or if you don't have some good practice that you put into work every single day that actually helps balance your nervous system, even if you are in chronic pain, because your sympathetic nervous system is constantly firing, that what's the balance of the sympathetic nervous system? Well, it's the parasympathetic nervous system. And breathing or mindfulness activates the parasympathetic nervous system. We've talked about that a lot, right? Increasing vagus tone, vagus being the cranial nerve 10 that's responsible for the majority of the parasympathetic nervous system. Well, if we don't have tools and techniques to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and we're constantly stressed, what can we do? Well, we can eat. And what happens when we eat, right? What happens when we eat is we have to digest the food. And believe it or not, but the digestion process of our food is actually a parasympathetic activity. All right. So imagine this, right? Imagine that we're so stressed and we don't have the tools and techniques, breathing, mindfulness, exercise, listening to music, spending time with family, loved ones, friends, et cetera, going out in nature, whatever it is that you find that can decrease stress, that can bring some balance and resiliency to your nervous system. We don't have that. And so then after work or at the end of the day, when everything is kind of closing, but we're still stressed and high strung, right? We go and have a few drinks and what? Eat. Just eat. And then at night I eat and I'm stressed and I can't fall asleep. And so what do? I grab that bag of chips and eat. Right? Well, what am I doing? I'm actually putting something in my mouth. I'm sending it into my stomach. And when my stomach gets it, what does it have to do to it? It has to try to digest it. So secretly, what I'm trying to do is actually activate my parasympathetic nervous system by shoving my mouth with food. Okay. So part of it isn't that, our food is like nutritionally poor or anything like that. It's also that we're chronically stressed. And we don't have the tools and techniques that we've learned in this mindfulness class of breathing and coming back to the present moment and listening to music or sounds or, walking or anything like that. And so we eat. and we shove ourselves with food because we're so stressed and we're trying to activate our parasympathetic nervous system by forcing our body to digest food. If our body is constantly digesting food, then that parasympathetic nervous system is going to be on to some degree because that's the nervous system that helps digest our food. Okay. So what does he say? Great. These are these two ways, right? Run away from them. There is a whole other way to approach painful experiences. 5. All right, so how does Jon Kabat-Zinn recommend we relate to unwanted and painful experiences? A way of being rather than a way of perpetual doing and forcing and resisting. This new way doesn't involve turning away from painful experiences or trying to suppress it. This is the way of mindfulness. I don't know why I think that's so funny. A way of opening to and befriending our experience moment by moment by moment. We attend, we befriend, we put out the welcome mat. We can practice in this way for even the briefest of moments. That's important. Right? Because what happens, we feel as if when we go through life, right, especially with all the ages that we have, right, that we feel like we know how to, well, I've dealt with this in this way for such a long period of time. And even though it's like there's some sort of like safety net that I still feel with that, right? And this happens a lot in like domestic violence. It happens a lot, and there's some like familiarity. I'm not going to call it safety. I'm going to call it familiarity. And so it's that familiarity that we go back to, even if that familiarity is harming us. There's still a going back. It's kind of like, oh, I'm familiar with this, so I'm going to go back, right? And that's really important, even to bring mindfulness to of, oh, my patterns are going towards something I'm familiar with, but are they really healing? Right? And that's really important. And so that's where these brief moments really, really, really come into play. Because nobody's taking away the familiarity until you're ready for it to be taken away or for you to release it. Right? Because if you feel like something's being taken away from you, then you're like, oh, then people struggle with wanting it. So it's like, oh, I'm ready to release. Okay. So it's these brief moments, but sort of like, look, you're stressed your whole life. Have you ever tried not to be stressed for a split second? Right? Kind of like the practice we've done, right? Can we drop the resistance to something we want to change in this moment for just a split second? You can grab it. You can pick up the resistance as soon as you're done after that split second, right? So you can pick up that familiarity and you can go back to your old ways. But here's this moment, this brief moment, and you can make it as brief as you want to turn to it, to peek at it, to befriend it, to open up to it, right? With an openness and curiosity, right? All these same kind of words that come back, okay? Putting out the welcome mat. We practice in this way for even the briefest of moments, just taking a peek and only in accordance with our motivation and energy level in the moment. And again, I would add, and your ability to resource and anchor. Okay. The key is to engage in this open-hearted, and basically interested and curious way. Curious, there's that word again, right? There's these words that reappear. Openness, curious, right? As best you can. Best you can. And then there's the without judgment. Knowing that the judgment's not good enough. But I'm doing that the best, but you're not good enough. As best you can for brief moments, but then also coming back and re-engaging over and over again. All right, so here's this new way. And we've talked about this over the years. But now it's Jon Kabat-Zinn. So there's a bit more potency, let's say, in it. 40 years of research. We would call him maybe the godfather of mindfulness in the United States of America. That's just him saying it, right? But I gotta, when I hear people like this talking about this, it's sort of like, even if I put all my walls of resistance up, say this is BS, this is crap, this is not going to work, doesn't work for me, blah, 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 right? If I can put all those walls up and just for a moment say, could it be true? And if I don't open up to that, if I don't even ask that question of myself, let's say I am so resistant, right? If I'm not asking that question for myself, well, what's the likelihood that it's going to change? 0. Now I say, oh, I don't really want to believe this because I think it's so not true. But could it be? And there's that openness and curiosity. Could it be? Okay. Now I open to it, but I want to go away because I'm familiar with this other thing. Being in chronic pain is something that people are familiar with. They look for it. You look for it. You actually look for it because you're so familiar with it that you're sort of like, oh, this is how I know I am. And any other way, it's sort of like, could it be? And so we open up to it, right? We open up to it, look at it, come back, 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 look at it. And we do this over and over and over and over again, right? That's what he's talking about there when he says, but in a curious way, as best you can for brief moments, but then also coming back and re-engaging over and over and over again. However strange this may sound, yes, it does sound strange, John Kabat-Zinn. Because, ever since I was a kid, I've always tried to get rid of my pain. We are cultivating and refining mindfulness, insight, and equanimity by turning toward what we most fear to feel or experience when it comes to chronic pain condition that medicine has not been able to help us with beyond a certain point. Right? In learning to live with it, we come gradually over time to be more open to it, to investigate it, and to befriend it as best we can. But do keep in mind, we only open to it to the degree that we feel ready to do so in any given moment. We only open to it to the degree that we are willing to turn toward the full range of our experience, even when it is highly unpleasant, off-putting, and unwanted. And we turn toward it as best we can with a huge degree of kindness extended to ourselves. We are putting out the welcome mat for what is happening for the simple reason that whatever is happening is already happening. Right? And this is where we come to, if it's happening, then it must be perfect. It must be. It's happening. There's nothing else. It's not happening in any other way. So here it is. Right? Or we could put up a resistance to what is happening and then create suffering. Whatever we are feeling, we are already feeling. The challenge is, how are we going to be in wise relationship to it in this moment? Any attempt to turn away from it, understandable as it may be, is only a way of denying the reality of the situation.